PB. Mar. We are going to put on the table a central issue, that of the civilized internet. I am not even saying a regulated internet, I am saying a civilized internet. Thank you, Nicholas. So if the internet needs to be civilized, it is because it is not. And so those who populate it, the internet users, we would call barbarians, it is us. 4 years earlier, it was the People's Republic of China, one of the 10 countries hostile to the internet, that wanted to civilize it, a fine legacy. So what better than a world conference to help civilize this internet file? On the eve of the G8, I will bring together, with the agreement of my colleagues and in particular President Obama, the major stakeholders in the virtual society in each of the G8 countries. Ah, the IG8 Paris, capital of the internet, its white tents, its Tuileries Garden, its heavyweight guests, Facebook, Google, the decision makers of the web, and in the middle of these illustrious talkers, an internet user, a somewhat lost barbarian. Basically, he said, well, listen, it was pretty cool for a while, but now everyone has to grow up, and the nation states have to take back power and reclaim all this, because it's become too important to leave it to you, the people. Which was incredibly arrogant. And then a second one asks President Sarkozy to take a strange oath. The US official continent is a new land. So as you go to the G8, I have one small request. Not to harm you. Of course. Why would you want us to harm you? You are a potential for growth, for extraordinary knowledge. I like your expression, the eighth continent. I could already imagine him planting the flag of France in this new continent of the internet. But if any government can proclaim its sovereignty over the internet, then it's no longer the internet at all. To summarize, IG8, big shots, clean economy, control, copyright. The themes are clear, simple, effective, and civilized. What's all this noise? The Arab Spring, dissidents protesting and letting the world know using the internet. That could have been an interesting theme for this IG8, but hey, freedom of expression is less appealing than private company directors coming to defend their business. That's glamorous and more profitable. So on one side, we have connected people who use a tool, the internet, to express themselves freely, to talk to each other, to exchange ideas. And then on the other, certain politicians or industrialists who don't understand where all this noise comes from. This noise where anyone can say anything and they try to turn down the volume. It's a question of comfort. Those who have always talked are the ones who normally appear on TV. And that gives a counter history of the internet. And it would start like this. Do you think that the internet was created by the military to protect communications in the event of a nuclear attack? Well, it's more complicated. Most of the people who created it were hippies, even if they worked for DARPA. A large part of the people who created the internet took LSD. So it was naturally a rather open-minded environment. Summer of '67, San Francisco, Summer of Love, that was the climax of the IPI culture. It was right after that they all went into the forests, the IPIs, and they were really the same people who a few years later would say, we have another place, we have another territory to build a community, to reestablish what we were unable to do in the real world, which is the virtual territory. Computers are just like LSD, which was taken elsewhere. It's the same thing. It increases the spirit. It was going to be a tool that we could tinker with, that we could make, and whose code we could modify ourselves. And by doing that, we were expanding our relationship with the world to include individuals who would connect one by one. At the same time, on the East Coast of the United States, this same spirit of tinkering and tinkering was spreading. MIT, a famous research institute, began hiring hackers like Richard Stallman, who would invent free software 10 years later. And at the time, even in terms of technology, nothing was blocking this spirit of openness. At first, we didn't have passwords. There was no security in our computer system. And the reason was that the hackers who had created the system a few years before I arrived had realized that any security system would have allowed administrators to control and restrict hackers. So they thought, why give them a tool that they could use against us? And that was a good thing. Everyone could do whatever they wanted. The system didn't try to control human beings. Later, the administration tried to put in security measures and pushed for passwords. So I wrote a computer program to retrieve and then decrypt people's passwords. And then I sent them a message saying, I saw that your password was this. Why don't you join me and not use any password at all? You just hit enter. It's the shortest password there is. It's really quick to type, and it's just as secure as the password you're currently using. And besides, you're an anti-password campaigner. What unites us is sharing. It's the idea of sharing. If information can't go this way, it goes that way. It'll go through this computer or that computer, but it'll end up coming together. That's how it was designed by the American military, and that's how it was later hijacked at some point by American academics, then by people like us, and now by the entire planet. Suddenly, people discovered that they had the ability to use this medium to share information with each other. And when there was enough of information on the network, search engines were needed to find things. This combination of the World Wide Web and search engines allowed people to discover each other even if they didn't know each other. What is the net? That's it. It's a peer-to-peer exchange. Worse still, 1-to-1 or 1-to-1,000 or 1,000-to-1. It's about completely reversing things, as they have been up until now, with the clergy, the church spreading the good word, then the politicians spreading the good word, then the printer spreading the good word. There are some great things in there, but we just said let's change that. There's a tool that can change that. Let's try it. I express myself, and potentially my neighbor, just like the rest of the world, can read me. That's what this network, designed under LSD, provides. Among the first, teenagers quickly, very quickly, take to it. Some call them pirates, others hackers or privateers. But above all, they are curious. They search, test, tinker, and their young age is no coincidence. It's the perfect place to escape parental censorship, the place where adventure is possible. Ah, damn youth. I thought these kids, these hackers, were a bit disconcerting. They paraded around, they were provocative, and I thought there wasn't much difference between them and the skateboarders. I thought we could take their modem and give them a skateboard, it would be the same thing. And then I heard that one of them had returned home and found his 12-year-old sister surrounded by a bunch of Secret Service people who pointed their guns at her while others checked all the electronics in the house including her alarm clock and her Metallica cassettes. And I thought, maybe these little rascals are more dangerous than I imagined, if the government treats them like that. But the government acted as if it were threatening our civilization. But in my opinion, that wasn't the case at all. It even seemed to me to be quite civilized in a rather advanced way. And quickly, the various intelligence services all tried to integrate the skills of these network hackers. It happened to us at 6 a.m. to arrive at a house located in the province of Tours and knock on the door to say, "Here's the police raid." To have parents who opened their eyes wide and said, my son, he's never left his room, he's always in his room, etc. In fact, he was a reputable hacker, and he was a minor, you know. So that means we're dealing with a new population. We're a bit helpless when faced with this problem, and we couldn't recruit people like that for the house. On the other hand, why shouldn't we have people do national service? In the interest of national service, reputable people, and so on. Who could work not in the shadows, but for the nation? So we started recruiting people. At the time, we didn't say hearts, but rather pirates. They helped us understand. In France, that was the time when the Balinao, recruited by General Guillot, aka the Whale, landed in the basements of the DST. I only had one the first year, I had two the second year, and then it went up to about 10 or 15. I used to meet them all personally beforehand, so I had informed the recruitment centers of the profiles I was looking for. I met the guys, and I selected them based on their sense of humor. The more they made you laugh, the more serious they were to me. Because you have to be crazy to do these things. You have to have fun. Every year, we had new Balin, and every year, he could bring us something new. But for the most part, they were worthy people. Others we were suspicious of because they were handpicked. You know, the KGB did the same thing as us. Since they didn't have many computer scientists at the time, they recruited some hackers and told them, well, listen, instead of having fun for nothing, I'll pay you a little more if you go and see this or that system. The English Americans are imposing themselves. And I see a hacker presented as a hacker named Jean-Bernard Conda. He represents a group that was created very recently called the CHA Computer Club of France. And I realize on the set that he is in fact in cahoots with the police officers who are also present. I want to know, can I get into the Iraqi Ministry of Defense? I want to know how much ammunition they currently have in their stock. Here, page 629 of this Path Iraq. The network is IDS managed by the partner called BTC. The access code 0 to exit is 4180 access code. Then you look in the previous paragraph. I won't go for the number of the central computer of the BTC company, to which you are going to ask for all the government, medical, or other computers. Well, I arrive at Iraq, and then I can decline. You go down the tree structure like in an architecture by systematically asking, and no one notices. I think there are passwords inside that block. There is no password that blocks inside. As my dear colleague said, it is totally impossible and directly Gorju. Yes, you have become a colleague of Mr. Gorju. That's good. He took out my personal file for me earlier. Okay. Yes. No, but he makes others. Yes, there is no... Philippe Legorju, the colleague in question, was in fact a former gendarme, former head of the GIGN. Yes. And so I go to see him and he explains to me that he works with the police. It's something that had a somewhat devastating effect. It's that it obviously spread very quickly. And as everything gets known very, very quickly on the internet. There, it happened. And we found ourselves with a community that completely broke up, that oriented more towards software than towards the culture of tinkering, towards hacking. And this has had another devastating effect, which is that there is no strong hacking culture. And so the media, when the mainstream media start talking about hacking, we always turn to the cliche of the pirate, and not in fact of the maker, of the person who's going to divert objects, and we really lose the meaning of the word. Officers from the Criminal Investigation Department searched the premises of the Chaos Computer Club in Hamburg last night. Members of the club, known as hackers, are suspected of having penetrated the computer system of the European Center for Nuclear Research. Recently, the club is said to have hacked the computer system of NASA. The police cause a surprise search at the Chaos Computer Club in Hamburg. 15 specialists from the Hamburg police, accompanied by their French colleagues and the Criminal Investigation Department, searched the club's premises as well as 3 apartments. By creating the CCCF, the intelligence services, the French, were actually inspired by the first major hacker group, the Chaos Computer Club, created 10 years earlier in Germany, and which, despite infiltration attempts, has always managed to remain independent. Andy Mormagoon, one of the club's long-standing members, is a far cry from the hackers portrayed by the media. Hacker ethics have always played a major role for the Chaos Computer Club. Began with the idea that computers are a tool for collectively solving problems. So the idea is to guarantee access to information for everyone and to reduce the concentration of power. That's what the internet allows us to do, by giving us the means to communicate freely, without limits or constraints, with the entire world. Of course, there is a peaceful goal behind this, because people who discuss things don't shoot each other. Hacking is the scientific approach. We observe something we don't understand, and we ask ourselves, well, how? Why? And we try to understand. That's what hacking is. It was hackers who built the first computers, the first programming languages. Hackers built the internet, and they're still building it every day. The hacker ethic means that you can work around problems. So we always try to work around problems rather than confront them. But there are threats to the internet that we have to deal with. There are tyrannical governments that try to control the internet. There are good governments that behave badly on the internet by trying to filter all our content, trying to monitor us or control the internet in different ways. We can't just get around that because sometimes we think we're doing something fair and free on the internet, but we end up in prison. It's a fact that almost everything that goes on the internet is recorded by the NSA. And I know the NSA well from the inside, and I can tell you that their despotism is diminished by their incompetence. They record the entire internet, but they have no idea what to do with that data. And the more they have, the more confused they get. So looking for a response to this massive surveillance of the network that is looming on the horizon. The same teenagers, the tinkerers, the hackers, from the beginning, they have been building the network according to their desires or needs. There is a new need to preserve our exchanges. So a new tool arrives. In 1984, I was very active in peace movements. I also developed software that helped certain movements for peace and justice, such as the Committee in Solidarity with the people of El Salvador. I had noticed that their office had been burglarized by the FBI, who had taken the list of their members and donors. It seemed obvious to me that this type of organization could encrypt their documents in order to protect them in the event of a burglary by the government. So I wanted to create software that could encrypt files using a public key cryptography system, which gave birth to PGP. We started seeing a lot of things that increased the pressure in terms of surveillance, and that's what motivated me, so that PGP would be free and open source. And that's how the source code spread all over the world. Oh, the damned mania for sharing. Except that at the time, cryptography was considered a weapon of war and was used exclusively by the military and was banned from export. Suffice it to say that the American authorities started with the big ears of the NSA, the agency that listens to communications, so war was appreciated. I saw a file that contained the first version of the program, its manual, and its source code. I downloaded it and read everything. And that same night, I wrote him a message saying, "Congratulations, you've done something great. You're going to change the world. You're also going to get yourself into a hell of a mess. When trouble comes, I'll be able to help you. That's who I am. That's what I do, and you can ask me anything you want." That was 10 days before a federal officer came knocking on his door in Boulder, Colorado. 3 years later, they dropped the case. There was a lot of strong backlash against this criminal investigation. The entire computer industry was on my side, and it's the most powerful industry in the United States. In hindsight, the real answer is that e-commerce needed strong encryption, so they let us do it because it allowed the banks to make money. If we can encrypt our data, it's not because governments capitulated to Mr. Zimmerman, it's because governments capitulated to banks like Citibank, Deutsche Bank, and Societe Generale. It's quite shocking to hear people say that cryptography should be outlawed, because if we're forbidden from protecting our data, criminals can still do it. They can hire the entire Russian mafia to do it. So if privacy is outlawed, that means only outlaws have a right to privacy. The original idea, however, was simply to respect privacy. The internet itself is as much about total communication as it is about global surveillance. So allowing people to communicate without the risk of being monitored is not a crime. It could even be quite useful and healthy. And then we will be told that those who keep the network alive, who come up with this kind of solution to preserve it, are crazy. They shouldn't have bothered. One day, I wrote a sort of Declaration of Independence for cyberspace and sent it to my friends. I didn't really think it would go any further, but the next morning, I realized that it had gone around the world. I was receiving emails from people from all over the world. It was quite a moment. I was a little disconcerted because I hadn't really paid attention when I wrote the text. And I couldn't imagine for a second that it would become a reference document, but it did overnight. How many young girls will have to be raped before the authorities react? How many will have to die from taking fake medication? How many teenagers will have to be manipulated? How many homemade bombs will have to explode all over the world? How many creators will have to be ruined by the theft of their works? It is time, my dear colleagues, for a G20 of the internet to meet and decide to regulate this modern means of communication invaded by all the mafias in the world. Ah, that famous mafia network. For many years, the authorities have been asking the same question over and over again. But who is behind this internet? And so who should be held responsible? May 6, 1996, the first attempt at a response in France. A police raid took place on two independent internet service providers, WorldNet and FranceNet. Pornographic photos featuring young children. This is what the police found on the two incriminated networks. The two managers were brought to justice. We have them. Those responsible would therefore be those who manage the pipes through which the content passes, as if the postman were responsible for the mail he carries. RFI Aladian, founder of FranceNet, was one of the two CEOs handcuffed that morning. The problem with pedophilia is that it's an easy subject. That's the thing, pedophilia is the only subject in which there is an unambiguous, when we see a pedophile photo, we know that it is pedophile, and we can decide to delete it immediately. But the problem is that by deleting this pedophile photo, we immediately recognize that we have this capacity to censor, and therefore to be responsible for all content, including all those that are much more ambiguous. So if you remove pedophile images, you are also responsible for any hateful messages that contain the illegal practice of medicine, any copyright infringement, whether you know about it or not. What was at stake was, what is the role of an access provider? Is it a guy who censors the entire web and creates a kind of censored garden? Or is it a guy who says, here's a tip, and everything behind it is up to you? That was my position. It was funny because we saw both popular media outlets like TF1 that ran headlines about a pedophile ring that had been arrested in France, but when we later found out what had happened, they didn't correct it. The press will never understand what the internet is. Out of apathy, fear, and corporatism, we mix all that up. We are still paying for this misunderstanding today. That is to say, the internet is for pedonazis. The internet is necessarily evil, it is necessarily stupid, it is necessarily cats skateboarding on video, or babies laughing for 3 minutes, or it is, In 1999, the Higher Council for Audiovisual Media in France, headed at the time by Sylvain Bergère, even organized the first World Summit of regulators dedicated to the internet. Because, well, something had to be done to control this network. We said, of course, there was no question of censoring the internet, or even trying to prevent its development, on the contrary, but of regulating it. Well, the internet can say anything. Anything about anyone. And we know that today. We can say that you are a bastard who killed your wife, or slept with your daughter, and you can protest, it's over, it's gone, right? At that point, you have the justice system that can intervene if you file a complaint, but how long will it take? And your image is damaged forever. So that's what needs to be addressed. There is a self-regulation of speech and comments that has been set up on the internet. And this phenomenon of self-regulation, and we now have good studies that show it, will not promote speeches that are absolutely false, conspiratorial, racist, dangerous, etc. The thing is that this collective work of internet users is often done in a difficult and violent way. We know about heated discussions on the internet, but if someone says something completely false, they won't see their speech reproduced everywhere, except to say that they are wrong. And so there is a collective capacity for verification, for validation, both factual and normative, that internet users operate among themselves. But some politicians, industrialists, or public figures are not convinced. We need to find out who holds the key to this internet. If it's not the access providers, then it's their brothers, the hosts, those who allow internet users to create websites, personal pages, and therefore to express themselves. All of a sudden, an AFP dispatch comes out. Estelle has the idea of attacking an internet host who is distributing nude photos of her that had already been published in a newspaper. What is a host? What is the internet? Sex, sexual abuse. And there it was. Valentin Lecombre, a libertarian internet user, really didn't expect to one day become the object of a famous model's anger. Anger that could well cost him dearly. Valentin Lecombre is a web host. This means that he hosts all sorts of web pages in his computer's memory that help him access the internet. He earns his money by selling IT services at the same time. He's far from rolling in money. At first, I was given a fairly light sentence, but on principle, because I had been convicted and I was facing other lawsuits. So I appealed, and I shouldn't have done so, because on appeal, I came across Marie-Françoise Marie, a judge who strongly sided with me and ordered me to pay 300,000 francs. We had said that we were going to throw a spanner in the works, by saying that we didn't want to know whether this was a space of freedom or not. There is an invasion of privacy since a photo was found. We ignore the external technology and consequently intervene, prohibit it, and award damages. I don't remember what damages were awarded to Estelle Hallyday for infringing on her privacy. At that point, I had to pay. I was really homeless. I left my apartment a bit on the spur of the moment because I didn't have the means to pay. Anyway, the atmosphere was not great. The courts, therefore, chose to put pressure on the host rather than directly address the citizen who posted the incriminating content online. Logical and clever, we solved the problem by removing the intermediary. I was made responsible for the 47,000 sites hosted on my servers. Consequently, since I cannot assume this responsibility, I have only one solution at my disposal, which is to close all the content. That means several hundred, several thousand small businesses, associations, information services, etc., which no longer exist today, because I am incapable of assuming responsibility for content that is deemed objectionable. But it doesn't always work. Raphaeladian did better. As long as a judge has not decided that this content is illegal, it is not up to people who are nothing, that is to say an access provider, to decide. And in any case, the judgment of dismissal, which was rendered in my favor in this case of pedophilia, considered that it was unconstitutional for a private entity, such as an access provider, to have the right to judge a priori on the content that can or cannot be seen by things. So not only could we not do it, but it was unconstitutional. Who are we to decide to apply censorship, to decide what people should or should not see? So as soon as an authority has decided that this content is prohibited, it notifies us and orders us to remove it. We are obliged to remove it, but we do not have the authority to decide what should or should not be removed. It is important to remember, and I think it is unique in the history of modern states of law, that the first decisions made by courts, whether in the United States or in France, on the internet, were in the 1990s, in 1996. The first decision made was not by a district court, a commercial court, or a local high court. The Constitutional Council, the highest court before any judge in France had to deal with the internet, censored an amendment presented by the Minister for Telecommunications in 1993, François Fillon, as part of the law liberalizing the telecommunications sector. In the middle of the night, an amendment that made technical intermediaries very responsible. The idea was already to have technical intermediaries control the system. In the United States, Bill Clinton had the Diskin Act passed, and the Supreme Court struck down the provisions relating to the internet. And these are unique facts once again in the history of states governed by the rule of law. The highest courts are ruling and protecting the internet, consciously or unconsciously. But it is still unique. The internet needs to be a place dedicated to freedom and not control. So I would like to see governments take an interest in the internet, but in an intelligent way. Right now, governments are taking an interest in the internet, but not in the right way. I think there is a lot of pressure to control it, and we have legislators who do not understand how it works or what the effects of their actions are when they try to regulate it in a way that is far too cumbersome and restrictive. And I think that this will be a major problem in the next 5 to 10 years. Cold turkey there. Captain, our computer is picking up a strange signal. With these notions of regulation, control, and freedom comes the question of net neutrality. The principle is simple. For the internet to be neutral, nothing and no one should modify the content that circulates through the pipes. Net neutrality is a bit like the concept of saying, well, wherever you are on the network, you see the internet in the same way, you access the same things. Well, that's what makes the internet, that is to say, a kind of large global database where you can chat with everyone, and above all, you can tell yourself that intelligence is not concentrated in one place on the network, i.e. at Orange, at Numericable, at this or that person. But intelligence actually comes from the ends of the network, i.e. from the users. Net neutrality is the cornerstone of freedom of expression on the internet. There is no freedom of expression possible if there is no net neutrality. Otherwise, you don't know what you are actually watching. Otherwise, you are in the matrix. You're in the matrix, you're presented with things that you don't know if they're true, that you don't know if the texts are the ones the authors wrote, and so on. You're presented with this article, you're told that this politician said this, what do you know about it? You have to trust it. You have to trust not just the journalist who wrote the article saying that so-and-so said that so-and-so was an idiot. You have to trust the network that transported the article so that it didn't rewrite it on the fly. You have to trust the tablet that presented the article to you so that it didn't rewrite it on the fly. We're not at all used to a system in which public speaking is so easy and free. We're used to a certain amount of control. We're an old Catholic country, after all. We like hierarchies, we like intermediaries between God and us. And the internet is still, in a certain way, a direct connection with God. So the intermediaries resist. Say to say, che, tadichiet, huga, sure, shu xiang san we huga, wa. Shu hang wei ta, shu gan. Sure, shu chia, shu gan. The endless quest continues. So who controls the internet? Procedures and laws follow one another, and the question remains. It is neither the access providers nor the hosts. Very well. So it is the internet users. Here is a new target to control in order to clean up the network.
Today in September 2012, a craftsman was convicted on the basis of the DOP. This is the first conviction to a fine of a few €100 because his wife had downloaded Rude Boy by Rihanna, that she didn't know how to use software, worse still, and that it was flashed 1,500 times because it was shared. But I almost want to say, against her will, it's the same logic, that is to say, sanction, make responsible, when we know that people are not, I would say, those who personally took part in the problem that is raised.
In order to normalize somewhere the surveillance of private companies, for reasons that are but totally base reasons, which are the Queen granted a printing monopoly to the London printing press, and in exchange, she could censor everything that came off its presses. It goes back to that time. We had this closed culture, where a small, privileged elite could decide what culture and knowledge would be delivered to the people. But the internet changed all that. The internet gave everyone a voice. For the first time in history, a 9-year-old girl in Paraguay, who just got her first laptop, can go on Wikipedia and add knowledge to the common knowledge of humanity. It's never happened before. There's one area where France has really been ahead of the game, and that's repression of copyright. And as soon as Sarkozy was elected, John Kennedy, the president of l'FPI, the global lobbying organization for record producers, said with Sarkozy, "We have our champion, he will defend our ideas." And so, once it came into effect, Adobe was able to send Marie-Françoise Marais, the president of the commission, on repression to the four corners of the world at the princess's expense, to participate in all the industry gatherings to say, look, in France it works, pull bogus figures out of her hat, and like that, sell the French model internationally. It continues today. It's
not a small technical change, it's truly a revolution, because I truly believe that we are at the stage of a change in civilization. There are going to be many, many models that are going to emerge, but it's not about racing with the club. Stop calling me the whipping boy of the internet. No, I'm not the whipping boy of the internet. Surely not that file sharing will happen. I think that's a possibility, but it has to be done in a way that preserves all rights, copyright, and the rights of all internet users, not just internet users, but all those who participate in the industry. I think there's a real problem here.
Are we paying for a rent, or are we paying for work? It's a fundamental issue. Going to get the AIDS vaccine when there are 200 known cases in the world is pointless. On the other hand, when there are a few million cases everywhere and deaths, in terms of money, it's better. So that's a model where you pay for the rent, and so you have to create rents if you want to create remuneration. Then you have another model that says you pay for the work. To say that society, through one means or another, whether it's the market economy or another form of economy, says, I want this work to be done, so I'm going to pay people to do it. This is a fairly classic model in France. It's what makes us a Soviet country in the eyes of many, but we have a highly developed public research sector. This is the CNRS model. This is the normal CNRS model. We pay researchers to do research, and the guy who finds something doesn't earn millions. He just did his research work, for which he was paid a decent researcher's salary, and that's it. And this is the choice that is hidden behind what the Ayatollahs of copyright do, among other things. It's a world of income from rent versus a world of income from work, and it's a very profound societal choice. If not regulating means letting the market regulate, that's not right for me. No, because it's a fallacious way of regulating things. I'm in favor of education, that's all. That is to say, learning practices, passing on practices. I find that much stronger than banning. That's it. And it so happens that life has brought me into contact with worlds like music, cinema, and so on, where we've clearly seen that these are old, heavy industries that absolutely didn't understand what was happening and that tried to ban things and that lost. Banning will never be a source of intelligence. Never. There are people who try to control access to 20th century culture. There will be people who want to control 19th century culture. And everywhere, there are people who think that when you take a physics book and make a copy for someone who is too poor to buy it, it is potentially criminal. We criminalize reading in the same way that we criminalize being poor. It reminds me of Victor Hugo, who said, quote, "By the will of His Majesty, it is forbidden for the rich and the poor to sleep under bridges. And in the same way, we forbid the rich and the poor to learn for free which does not penalize the rich at all, but crushes the poor. Well, if we could put an end to diabolical laws like the Adobe law, then we would have an internet that would respect human rights. The internet disrupts businesses, from retailers to the media and all types of industries. But the internet also disrupts governments because it allows people to create a new form of society without borders or limits. And that challenges the authority of these governments. So these governments and companies that are still stuck with old models sometimes come together to try to restrict the internet and fight against these changes. So we have to keep an eye on it, we repeat, in case we catch hackers. Now, there are multiple tools for monitoring the network. It's not just the big bad state that's monitoring the nice little citizens. It's much more complex, because all of us, in our frenzy of sharing and exchanging, are creating this surveillance society a little more every day. Timo Tuts is Estonian. He stupidly built a machine that, by scanning our ID, finds and displays all the information that we've left online of our own free will. It was quite scary for me to see that people really liked this machine. For me, there were good reasons to make it scary, but people are really excited at the idea of being able to see their data. But it also happens every day on Facebook, all over the world. People share their lives, and they love it. No dictator would have dared to dream of such a powerful tool to monitor an entire population. The big risk of the internet is perhaps not the hackers who share, but rather the companies that store the data that we voluntarily give them every day. Facebook is the postmodern version of stasis. That's how it should be seen. If we look at the number of informants, stasis had infiltrated a little over 10% of the population in East Germany. In some countries like Iceland, Facebook reaches almost 88% of the population. The information that users put on Facebook about their friends and what they do is deposited much more regularly than stasis agents could do when they reported information to their superiors. From a Visa credit card, it is possible to predict a divorce a year before you know it yourself, and that's just by looking at your purchasing habits. So imagine what Google or Facebook can know about you. If you're diagnosed with a serious illness, the first person to know isn't your parents, your close friends, your children, your husband, or your wife. It's Google. We built the internet in such a way that every use of it can be monitored in a way that every web server stores information about who's accessing what. And if that server is Facebook's, and 800 million people are using it to communicate, then there's a guy who has a right to know what everyone is watching and doing. And that guy will then be under pressure to sell or give the government and the evil of the earth crucial information about what everyone is doing. Social networks live on the thread of trust by trying to go as far as possible in terms of using personal data. And this is also what Google CEO Eric Schmidt said when he said, "We're right next to the red line, we're trying not to cross it." I don't know if this statement from a company like Google isn't the most worrying thing that could be said in this area. Having free access to the internet doesn't necessarily mean being free. In 2012, Azerbaijan, a country ranked 162nd out of 179 for press freedom, hosted the United Nations Internet Governance Forum in an attempt to plant the tree that hides the forest. Hundreds of freedom of expression advocates gathered in Baku, the capital. It's the same one that Nicolas Sarkozy had set aside in his IG-8 businessmen guise. We're not ready for a paradox. Yet in this same country, dressing up as a woman like blogger Emin Milli and posting a video online mocking the government for investing in a large herd of wolves is risky. After doing so, Emin was beaten up by two thugs who obviously accused him of having struck first. He will therefore spend nearly a year and a half in prison for fresh, light, courteous hooliganism. The internet is not free in Azerbaijan. Of course, we are technically free to use the internet. I can go and write anything on Facebook or Twitter, but that does not mean that when I leave my house, I will be free. I will walk down the street as if nothing had happened. I could be attacked. I could be put back in prison. And it is not just me. There are many people who have been like this. What I am trying to say is that this government is announcing today, look, we have more than 60% internet penetration. There are 900,000 people out of 9 million who are on Facebook in Azerbaijan, and they say, look, it is growing fast, we are a free country. But that is not true. You cannot measure the freedom of a country by measuring its technical access to the internet. Another example, still in Azerbaijan, Khadija Ismailova, a journalist for a radio station banned from FM but broadcast on the internet. While investigating a corruption case involving the president's family, she received a letter. Inside, there was a photo of her making love to her partner. In fact, 3 cameras had been installed in her apartment, including her bathroom, and the letter was a threat to stop her investigation. She continued. The sex tape was posted online, and rather than asking for the website hosting the video to be censored, Khadija chose to sacrifice her privacy in the name of defending freedoms. He did not expect my reaction at all. I did not back down. I said that I was not ashamed of what had happened, of what I had done. I said that those who should be ashamed were those who steal the people's money, who divert the people's opportunities to enrich their own families. I made a public statement on Facebook, and then the media picked it up. The investigation was opened, and my friends and family told me to ask the investigators, the government, or the Minister of Communication to block the website hosting the video in Azerbaijan so that my life would not be in danger. I decided not to do so because our government is waiting for the slightest opportunity to legitimize website censorship. If I ask for this website to be blocked, it will give them an excuse to do it again later. So I did not make this request. Today, if the temptations to censor or monitor the network are growing, it may also be a simple question of finance, not low-cost surveillance. A few years ago, buying a radar antenna to spy on a communications satellite was not cheap and was reserved for large industrialized nations. But those days are over. In a world where almost all communications are digitized, the cost of money is falling, the temptation is rising, and the surveillance business is becoming profitable. Everyone is talking about cyber warfare, and no one is talking about cyber pay. But why? Well, it's simple. It's because there are a bunch of super rich lobbyists involved in these cyber warfare operations, and all these companies are trying to terrorize the US Congress and others so that they will fund these programs and get their share of the pie. I have been in the European Parliament since 2009. when there were also elections in Iran. At that time, many Iranians were posting videos online showing thousands of men and women protesting in the streets to ask where my vote is. I was in contact with many activists, and the more I spoke to them, the more they explained to me that they were being found, tracked, hunted, and imprisoned using repressive technology. And I thought I had to investigate. As I dug deeper, I discovered that these technologies were not only used in Iran, but also in Egypt, Tunisia, Syria, Bahrain, and many other countries where repression is systematic, but where European companies have been able to export what I call digital weapons. It is high time that we put a stop to these exports, and that these companies behave more transparently and responsibly. There is a huge market with over 1,000 companies selling mass surveillance technologies. For example, a South African company sells a kit for $10 million a year that can permanently record all the telephone communications of a medium-sized country. This is what William B., a former director of the NSA, called turnkey totalitarianism. The engine, wheels, and chassis have been built. The key is in the ignition, and all that remains is to turn on the ignition. In truth, contact has already been made for certain populations, Muslims for example, in the United States in general. We have here all the essential ingredients for a new transnational and totalitarian dystopia. I will be the president of the France of human rights. I do not believe in real politics that makes people renounce their values without winning contracts. Well, speaking of contracts, France won a nice one with Colonel Gaddafi. The delivery of an entire infrastructure to monitor the entire Libyan internet. Convenient for a dictator. But of course, that was well before the victorious French operation launched to liberate the country. Long live the friendship between France and Libya. When the situation began to degenerate a little in Libya, we were told that France had sold a global surveillance system for the entire population. Abdallah Sestoussi was a person who was actively wanted by the International Criminal Court, and who was convicted by Contas in France for acts of terrorism. So we started to dig a little deeper, and we quickly came across a company called Amos, which was directly implicated by the Wall Street Journal, which discovered the infrastructure and facilities of a Mises in Libya, in a prison that had been disused and rehabilitated to become a listening center. Is it legal or not? When it's not legal, you don't sell. But are you aware that human lives were threatened? In 2003, the embargo was lifted. In 2007, he was shaking hands with the bigwigs, okay? And you came in 2011, okay? Ask me if I was asked if it would be used to track down opponents, okay, in his country. But how do you expect me to answer that question? Personally, when I sell you a pen, okay, or when you actually do an interview, well, the pen, okay, what you write, the person responsible is not the seller of the pen. How can we, without shaking our knees, say that we have just sold a pen to a country that, well, that was in the middle of a revolution, to which we have in fact helped a notorious dictator and even a terrorist in the person of Dallas, and also say without shaking our knees, okay, I'll give you a silo, I'll sell a silo. You know, you have to be really bold to compare what was sold at DB to a pen. It's not just Amesis that sells this kind of tool. Amesis has made a specialty of interception, legal interception, and mass interception on a national scale. Now, the technology itself is of French origin. It's something that was born in the Lipsis laboratory, which also gave birth to a company that we come across quite regularly when we do research on countries where we suspect these technologies are used, a company called Cosmos. Even though we are assured that Cosmos does not sell surveillance systems and everything, we have a lot of evidence that proves the opposite. It is important to know that this company, Cosmos, was caught red-handed selling a surveillance system through an Italian consortium to Bashar al-Assad. And it didn't do that 10 years ago, it didn't do that 5 years ago. It was just getting ready to sell it a few months ago. Since then, Cosmos has announced that it is withdrawing from the Syrian project while specifying that it has remained in full compliance with all applicable legislation, a position also defended by Amasis. After all, it is true. Today, no law prohibits a Western company from selling surveillance weapons to a dictator. Traditionally, democratic countries establish a list of weapons that they cannot sell without authorization, and another of countries to which they cannot sell these weapons. Surveillance and internet control technologies are not on this list. They are not prohibited technologies. If we are serious about promoting democracy, we must not sell these technologies to countries that will abuse them. And on top of that, we must not set a bad example. We cannot ignore security needs. That is important. But we cannot ignore the balance that must be struck with civil liberties either. And that is the balance we are talking about. We just have to be brave enough to face that challenge. To demonstrate why we really need a measure like surveillance, but also to remain critical in order to preserve that balance at all levels. It annoys me every time I hear the expression lawful interception, which is the official term used to describe wiretapping. Because the very notion of lawful interception implies that it's okay, that it's good because it's in compliance with the law. But that's just because it's legal doesn't mean it's right or morally justifiable. And history has always been very hard on those who chose to follow the law when the law was bad. I think the law is bad, and that's why I entered politics, to change all that. The Vice President of the European Commission, Viviane Reding, said a few years ago in front of the European Parliament that we had sacrificed our freedoms for too long on the security front and that it was time to do justice to our freedoms. Now that time has passed, that the general nervousness of 9/11 and what followed has subsided, perhaps we should ask ourselves, do we really need this? Because it is worse than being on a slippery slope. The biggest battle is over individual freedoms in order to undo certain things. Starting with the fact that my mobile phone could be tracked by the government. That was unthinkable in the mid-1980s. How did we get here and how can we go back? Technology is no more a tool for liberation than it is a tool for enslavement. John Perry Bartlett's somewhat angelic vision of a world free from states and moving towards a global well-being through the use of technology is a vision that must be seriously tinged, not with pessimism, but with pragmatism. Technology will be what we make of it. The real miracle is the promise that there will also be room for those smallest details that have been the basis for man's most rewarding wishes. In fact, what I believe is that we are still in a period of transition. In other words, it's not 1789 anymore, but what do we do now? What do we do? Here we go. We put the king back, we call Bonaparte, we are all stone rebels. What do we do? We know that things are going to go wrong, but what we need to do is to delay the moment when things go wrong as long as possible. And then especially if things go wrong, they go wrong for everyone. So some people choose to take action, and they do so with a sacred habit that the internet offers without asking permission, like the International Collective Telecomics, which in Syria helped internet users bypass the regime's surveillance. We can call them hackers, but above all, they are people connected to others through a network and who seek to help each other. In Syria, the network is completely monitored by the government. People have been arrested at home because of their online activity, and that must still be the case. People must have died because they had put I don't know what on Facebook, and we provided ourselves with the infrastructure to put things online while bypassing surveillance. It may seem pretentious, but at that time we were the only ones who could do it. An NGO cannot intervene as we did. We attacked the decisions of a sovereign state. In other circumstances, this would be considered a declaration of war. We, Telecomics, decided that it was important for people to be able to put information online, and we decided to circumvent the decisions of a state, by all means. A state can't do that. Neither can a secret service. But we did it. I don't know yet if it was right. I'm still thinking about it, but I think it was the right decision to make at that time. Mohammed Anfang Mohammed was just 20 years old. He was a student, he had brothers and sisters. I know his whole story, he told me. I had arranged interviews with a German newspaper. When we wanted to do the third interview, I looked for him and I couldn't find him. I asked people where he was. And quite by chance we got a video in which we saw Mohammed being beaten to death in a cell. He was just 20 years old, dreamed of a free world, a free country, and because he wanted to freely express his dreams, he was killed. Middle Africa, we have a message for you. Recently, there have been massive and many count, from Tunisia to Egypt. We are very happy to see the success of your struggles for democracy and freedom. We are also sad to see the violence that happens. Telecom words for defending free communications. During the last week, we worked intensively with providing lines and radio communications when the internet was shut down completely in Egypt. We also provide methods for circumventing internet filtering, as well as the strongest cryptographic software available to modern computers for avoiding government surveillance and repression. Telecom consists of hundreds, maybe thousands, of internet activists that work in the service of free communication. We use every communication technology that we master to try to keep the flow of information up. You are free to request anything from us. We do our best. We are from the interns. We come in peace. Let there be freedom for all people and computers. The question is, can hackers individually change the world? Maybe on some levels, in some details. Can they change the world together as a collective? Probably not that much. They don't work collectively that often. Now, can they do something by teaming up with other people? The answer is yes. There's a beautiful quote that I really like from Bench Neerman, who said, "It's no longer time to teach our children to surf. It's time to teach them to make waves." I believe that citizens must create the waves. I think that we are experiencing a profound change in society, and it's changing so quickly that we don't have time to understand what's happening. We don't know how to react. We're going to need a generation of people who were born with the internet, who grew up with the internet, who really understand what current legislators absolutely don't understand. We need them to be in power, and then we'll start to see real change. The Pirate Party is a wave born of the network. Thanks to it, it even ended up reaching the beaches of the European Parliament. I put up a really ugly website that said, you know guys, I think we can get 225,000 votes, and if we do that, we'll be in Parliament. Here's our plan. Here's how we're going to do it. I think we can do it. 3.5 years later, in the 2009 European elections, we got 225,915 votes, which propelled us into the European Parliament. When Nicolas Sarkozy was elected, and we read implicitly in his program the security madness of the internet, we said to ourselves that we had to get into battle order, that we had to invent something. That's when we created the Quadrature du Net, and we said to ourselves, well, we're going to hack politics. There are many examples of citizens' initiatives emerging from the network. Just like the Pirate Party, Le Quadrature du Net, originally a small French association, is shaking up the political agenda all the way to the European Parliament. That's my Epicurean, revolutionary side. The principle is always the same, acting without asking permission and behind the same dream, changing society like correcting 3 lines of code. As La Quadrature du Net, we create tools every day to help citizens understand the issues surrounding these issues, but also to allow them to participate. For example, we developed something called Pwn, which allows people to call the European Parliament for free. So we choose the list of MEPs to call, those who still need to be convinced, those who need to be targeted, etc., and people enter their phone number. Poof, their phone rings. And they are put in direct contact with the MEPs. This is something you can do with 3 pieces of voice over IP and 4 pieces of code and 5 patches on the internet. And the spirit of tinkering, patches, even works in politics. The initiators of the ACTA Treaty still remember it. What is ACTA? It is the Anti-Copyright Trade Agreement. It is an international agreement protecting copyright and intellectual property. We are not fighting against these values that already exist, but against aspects of this treaty that go against the interests of the people and many of our freedoms. Freedom, freedom, freedom. Freedom. ACTA was the Anti-Copyright Trade Agreement. It is a text negotiated in secret as a trade agreement that countries make among themselves, but which contained a number of repressive provisions on copyright, and which would literally turn internet intermediaries into a private copyright police and impose absolutely unacceptable repressive measures. For 4 years, we campaigned, we informed citizens so that they would take up this issue and contact the elected members of the European Parliament. And on July 4, the European Parliament rejected this text by 478 votes to 39, including 21 from the French UMP. This text is a historic victory. A few months ago, people were telling us, no, but that's completely impossible. No one saw the tidal wave that overwhelmed Parliament around the act coming. Well, that's the power of the internet when applied to democratic participation, to citizen participation. And that's what's somehow beautiful and a little bit magical. Because it can't be controlled, it can't be commanded. You don't blow a whistle, and there are 100,000 people lined up with a single head sticking out saying, "Chief, yes, chief." It doesn't happen like that. It's completely spontaneous, organic. We're surprised ourselves. We cultivate the culture of sharing. There's a new generation of politicians who weren't necessarily destined to become politicians. They now do the job of politicians who grew up on the internet and with the internet. They know what the term transparency means, what it means to make decisions in a transparent manner understandable. They are used to communicating quickly and reactively. They are also used to the fact that there are a certain amount of freedoms. So the German political class can no longer claim to know anything about all this. That is no longer possible. What deeply concerns me is what will happen between now and in 20 or 30 years, when the internet generation is in power and sets the tone in the political parties. Because we are on the brink of a major risk, that of building a surveillance society, a big brower far worse than any science fiction author has ever imagined. Until then, as some say, we must continue to code. Because what is under the hood of the internet, what makes the network run, is code. This computer code is simply a language that allows our computers, among other things, to display web pages or our software to do what we ask of it. It is like an alphabet that machines interpret and that allows information to circulate from one user to another. Like any language, this code is essential to communication. Everyone is free to learn it. For someone who works on the web, code is magic. You have to understand code if you want to go further, and especially if you don't want to be locked into an expression that would be controlled by merchants, controlled by software, controlled by legislators. That's why the whole defense of code, what we call free software, is so important. With computers, there are only two possibilities. Either the user controls the software, or the software controls the user. If it's the software that controls the users, where are we headed? Well, the owner of the software controls the users who use this software, and this software then becomes an instrument of power. In order for users to maintain control over the software, they need certain freedoms, and it is these freedoms that define what free software is. So we have built the world of free software. It's a world where you can use software freely. It exists because we created it, and now it's up to you to escape the world of proprietary software and join us in the free world. Writing computer code is a real skill that requires a lot of effort. You can't learn it in a day, but I really think we need to learn about this code. People need to understand how technology works and not see it as a mysterious black box. Transparency of code is a democratic prerogative, and so the value of free and open code, of citizens' access to this code, is obvious. So free software, open source movements, that's one thing. But let's not make a mistake. Today, code is only accessible to those who know how to use it, which is to say, an extreme minority. An extreme minority. And so one of the challenges for the times to come is not that we can access the code, but that citizens can become promoters, creators of the code, and that's where things will change. If you have not a 12% or 1% techno elite, but a capacity for 10, 15, 20%, and perhaps one day 50 or 60% of citizens to create not just their code, but ultimately the services they will need to use, and why not, since we are talking about it, objects that they will be able to create one day with 3D printers, since this is the obvious evolution towards which we are heading. We can clearly see that it is this capacity to create, and not simply to use networks, that for me will be the essential component of democracy. And this is how the internet comes out of its box. The spirit of the pioneers, whether IPIS or LSD, seems to be still there. The fumes are tenacious. Today, machines called 3D printers, designed by hackers, tinkerers, makers, are opening up new horizons and pushing the concept even further. A 3D printer is simply something that will cast a three-dimensional shape for you with plastic. In fact, it will create an object for you. So you can create objects with this. What is important, in fact, is the reappropriation of industrial processes, which are very expensive and which are now democratized. You should know that something like this costs less than €1,000. The big machine actually costs several tens of thousands of euros, and it is something that will allow us to simply have fun and play. It is a machine that, in a way, sells me a dream. I tell myself, but real life can be like the internet. We can hack processes, we can hack objects, and make things ourselves, and become the owners of our own little common good, whether tangible or intangible. I love the idea. I love the principle. I love thinking about the impacts that it can have. That is to say, the ability to hack objects, and that what happened to the music industry could reach the hair comb industry. We are in the early stages, and today it is very laborious, very difficult, and very expensive. But it is very, very exciting. Beyond 3D printers, hackerspaces also stem from the culture of the network. These hangars, studios, or garages, filled with all kinds of tools, are open to everyone day and night. Michelman, one of the pioneers of hackerspaces, even gives everyone the keys to the one he opened in San Francisco. In these places, solutions are invented to respond to real-world problems and thus have an impact on our daily lives. The applications are numerous. After the earthquake in Japan and the problems with the nuclear reactors at the Fukushima plant, the Japanese government wanted to prevent the population from panicking. So they did not provide all the information on radiation levels. So the hackerspaces in Tokyo and others around the world began to build their own GG meters. In Tokyo, they had good incentives to build effective GGR meters. There were quite a few people who were very good at electronics. So they worked together to build these measuring tools for very little money. They also had friends at the Crash Space Hackers Space in Los Angeles, and together they created the SafetyCast project. The idea is this: sell these GG meters very cheaply or even give them away. Since these meters are connected to the internet, they simply created a system that automatically records radiation levels wherever people who have them go. This way, we can have reliable information on radiation levels all over the world. From LSD to 3D printers, from research labs to hackerspace, it's come a long way. And during all this time, the internet has remained a network shaped by those who connect to it, that is to say, us, its users. And it's not finished changing. We would be wrong to think of the internet as a creature immutable. Today, the internet is a computer internet. Most of the data comes from users and computers. In the years to come, most of the data that will pass through the networks will come from sensors, connected objects, and not necessarily from humans. And the architecture that will emerge from this mobile internet and then this Internet of Things could be very different. This is a real challenge, because the technical temptation to organize the Internet of the future around known identified actors, who would therefore be given the keys in terms of power, this temptation is enormous. And so I believe that, for the years to come, our job as public actors in relation to this will be to draft and organize our actions to avoid this trend, which is much more worrying to me than the trends we are witnessing today. I would like to spread the idea that we have a fundamental right, which is access to knowledge. Just as Jefferson spoke of inalienable human rights, there is a human right. The inalienable right is to be able to know everything that can be known and recognized as being of general utility. No one had bothered to declare this right before, because there was no way to pass it on. But now, there is one. We must fight for this right. We must be good parents, because if we win this right in these primitive times, it will remain acquired forever. So the worst that could happen is that we say to ourselves, no, whose right is it? But hey, the freedom to broadcast and print is acquired. No, I think it is a daily struggle for everyone. I turn on my computer, what do I do? What do I do? Do I contribute to the building or not? Knowing that the building is messy, it is noisy, it is like life. It could sound like hunger or not. Today, nearly 200 cybersidents are incarcerated because they dared to express themselves on social networks. Networks monitored using systems designed in our democracies and sold by Western arms dealers. A full-scale attack on freedom of expression. In our democracies, content circulating on the internet is increasingly controlled and censored. Our computers, tablets, telephones, and files are riddled with spyware. This time, it is everyone's right to read that is under threat. So this counter-history of the internet, of access to information, expression, and knowledge, is far from over. This film is just one chapter. It's up to you to write the rest. All the goddamn day. I've been answering in my email. My work gets done that way. Can't you feel the fingers ache type until early in the morning? Can't you see the letters blurring? It's just stand for porn. But my song's obsolete. The spam nowadays doesn't have ads for porn. Yeah, rats. They ruined my song.